sure the voices of all Missourians are heard. His campaign prioritizes people above politics. As an entrepreneur and small business owner, he's founded and runs successful businesses in the medical device, technology, and real estate industries, paying fair living wages. Spencer is running because the people of Missouri deserve a senator that will actually listen to and work for their best interests, regardless of wealth, race, or political affiliation. He believes in accountability and transparency, investing in our future, and a government that works for all Missourians. Welcome, Spencer.
Thanks so much, Kathy, and thank you, Muleskinners. That's a pretty good summary. I appreciate you making the introduction. As it was mentioned, I've lived in St. Louis in Missouri my entire life. I grew up here in St. Louis County. I went to WashU. I did a 5-year program there focusing on business. I did 3 years of undergrad, and then I got my MBA in the last 2 years. I came out in 2009. There weren't jobs. I started a consulting firm and ended up in the real estate industry. And what I found in the real estate industry was that the rate of growth in Missouri and in St. Louis was very slow. And if I wanted to get involved with the future of our state and the future of our city, I had to get involved in the innovation space, which was what I was interested in from the start anyway. And I met with most of the entrepreneurial startups in the area. I ended up doing all of the leasing for the Cortex district and for Bridge Park, our agricultural technology district. And spent a ton of time recruiting companies to Missouri. And I learned what companies wanted in a state, what companies wanted in a city, and what was motivating people to want to be here. And one of the disheartening elements of leaving WashU in 2009 was watching all of my friends move out of town. It's absolutely incredible. And I think as I go across the state, one of the things that resonates most when I speak with people is that we export young people like we do beer and pet food in this state. Young people want to be in progressive areas. They want to be in areas where they feel a sense of community, where there's inclusivity, and we don't promote that nearly as much as a state. And we tend to vote for progressive policies, but not progressive politicians. And a lot of the reason for that, in my opinion, is that we go into communities and we say things like, you're voting against your own interests. And when you say that to someone, all they hear is, this person thinks I'm too dumb to know what's good for me. And they would rather vote for someone who literally isn't representing them than someone who they think thinks they're stupid. And we need to figure out the best way to talk with people, not at people. And that's what my background has been. So I both in the real estate community, where I started off in leasing and sales, and now I own a home rehab business where I spent years hanging drywall and painting walls and working with my carpenters and my team in rehabbing 3 to 5 homes a year, as well as with a medical device startup where I partnered with a doctor from BJC, and we're now developing a device that fills a hole in an infant's heart. It goes in through a catheter in the leg. And we're working with a very large hospital system in that development and patenting it, and we should be in animal trials in the next 4 to 6 months. So during the day, I'm with carpenters and tradesmen and union workers. At night, I'm running a medical device company with scientists and doctors. And what I found in all of those scenarios is everyone cares about the same things. They care about access to education. They care about access to quality healthcare. They want to spend more time with their family and their friends. They want to have better paying jobs. And this is all regardless of political persuasion. So my family has a farm out in Franklin County, Missouri. And when I told the neighbors out there that I was running for office, they said, well, Spencer, there's already a lot of Republicans running in the primary. Are you sure you want to get involved in this? And I said, well, I'm running as a Democrat. And they said, you're a what? And I said, well, I'm a Democrat. And they said, well, that doesn't make sense. You don't sound like a Democrat, and you don't act like a Democrat. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to, is if we strip off all of the rhetoric and all of the arguing about critical race theory and 1619 Project and everything else, most people, most Missourians want the same things. They want that healthcare, they want that education, they want the good paying jobs, they want access to high quality broadband internet, which by the way is feasible. And with satellite technology, we can bring that to rural communities without having to dig miles and miles of trenches. This is all on the forefront, and understanding technology, understanding how to communicate with people from different backgrounds, and getting out and shaking hands and knocking doors and believing in science and promoting things that truly matter to Missourians and to people around this country, I think is the only way we're going to be successful. And when I think about my friends who left, I see this amazing opportunity where we've learned that many jobs can be done from anywhere. And so this is an amazing time for our state where we can get together and say, how do we motivate and incentivize people to want to be here? We have an amazing quality of life for many people. We have resources. We have good paying jobs. We need to create a community that people want to be part of. And I believe that's essential. And so I never wanted to be in politics. This was never part of my plan. But about a year ago, I said to my wife, the next phase of my career, I want to be as impactful as possible. And what could we possibly do with our lives to do that? And we sat down, and I spent 4 months in my basement reading and writing and researching. And what I determined was that the gerrymandering of our system and the voter suppression, combined with the fact that there's so many people who have been left behind who are looking for a sense of community, has divided our society so much. So if you look at a group like QAnon, and I'm not saying we're ever going to appeal to people from QAnon, but one thing that everyone from QAnon has in common is they feel like they have a sense of loss, or they've been left behind, or the government has made their lives harder in some way. And Donald Trump preyed on the reptilian brain, is it's called in psychology, but kind of the raw emotion of people to give them common enemies. He went out and he said, this is MS-13 at the border, this is cartels, this is Muslims, and he gave them an enemy. And when people are left behind and they're looking for answers, those kinds of things make sense. But the real answers are in creating our own sense of community. It's about bringing people together around a common cause and a shared interest in making people's lives better, and not discriminating on grounds of race or wealth or privilege. And I am so concerned about the world that we're creating for future generations, both in our state and throughout the country, that I think it's essential that we pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and HR 1. And the only way we win, the only way we find a way to have that kind of an impact, is by making sure that we preserve the Senate that we add seats in the Senate, and then we preserve the House. And so I'm building this team. I'm working with our organization, and we're putting together a group of people who are all like-minded in wanting to make that kind of change, and ensuring that strategically we know exactly who we should be talking to and what we should be talking about, and doing it like neighbors, because neighbors shouldn't be the people you see on Facebook or Twitter every day. They should be the people you walk your dog next to on the street. And we've gotten so far from that world where it feels so uncomfortable to wonder, oh, am I sending my son over to a Trump voter's house for a play date? And do they, what does that look like? What do they believe? Do they believe in vaccinations? And we've politicized things that should never be politicized. And so now we're at a point where we need to move forward. And I'm confident that instead of just giving people something to vote against, if we give them something to vote for, if we give them belief and hope that we can live in a better society where we all work together to give people better access to healthcare and education and better paying jobs, we can create a world that makes more sense for all of us and that works for all of us. And I should say, because I didn't mention it earlier, my biggest concern outside of the division and the fascism that is taking form in our country is climate change. We need to leave this world a better place for future generations. And it is terrifying what is happening with ice caps melting and with mass extinctions of different species. And we need to unite around that as a common purpose, to invest in renewable energy and to get carbon neutral, and to not just stop, but reverse climate change. We need to invest in technology that has carbon capture capabilities. We need to figure out how to recreate icebergs. I mean, we have to invest in technology that can do things like that, because even if we just stop now, we're still on a death spiral. And we can't have that. We inherited this world in an amazing place, and we need to bring it back to a condition where it can thrive. So I'm running for U.S. Senate to be the voice of the people of our state. I am confident that, having lived here my entire life, I know the values of the people of this state and that I can represent those values. And my role in this position is to listen to absolutely everyone, to take what people are interested in, what they want in their lives, to then go to experts, understand what the experts are saying is the best policy that we can provide for that situation, and to propose that and to vote in that regard in Washington, D.C. And so that's my goal. And a few ways that we're getting engaged with the community. This past weekend, we had an event in Jefferson City. We had 3 bands play at a venue in Jefferson City. We're going to be doing this in at least 10 cities, assuming that COVID kind of takes a step back and people get vaccinated. But our hope is to bring people together around enjoyable celebrations of democracy, because it doesn't always have to be negative, and we need to engage people in ways we never have. Another thing we're doing is a YouTube series, and it'll be up on my website, and I'll tweet it out, and it'll be up on Facebook if you follow me, Spencer Toder for Senate. On Twitter, I'm at Spencer Toder. Or on the website, you can literally click on the face in the corner, and it's me, and you will begin a conversation with me. You can send me a message. I respond to the videos every morning. But the goal is to have accountability and transparency. And so we're starting this YouTube series where another individual and myself will be interviewing experts on 18 different policy issues. And this isn't a political conversation, because most things aren't needing to be political. This is listening to experts and saying, if we care about healthcare, what is the right healthcare policy for us and why? And let's talk about the actual ways that other countries are succeeding in these regards. If we're talking about education, how can we make education better? And factually, what does the science and data tell us? So we know from overseas studies that if a child is in 3rd grade and can't have actual reading comprehension, if they can't read something and then say it in their own words separately, that they're going to have a difficulty progressing from a comprehension perspective down the road. And so there are countries where everyone up until 3rd grade has reading tutors and make sure that by 3rd grade that can happen. And then they kind of graduate from that program. These are things that we can learn from. And by listening to experts, I think we can bring a lot of these types of policies into our country and into our state, so our people can continue to thrive. And so I really appreciate everyone's time today, and anyone who tunes in and watches this recording down the road. I'm happy to answer any questions. This is about accountability and transparency. One of the huge problems that we have as a state currently is we are so gerrymandered that there is no risk of anyone losing their job. And if you think about it from an accountability perspective, if I know that whatever I propose, as outlandish as it might be, isn't going to get me fired, then I'm going to propose whatever I want. And so we see these extremes continuing to grow. And I think if we're going to get rid of the extremes, we need to get rid of the gerrymandering, and we need to find a way to bring people back to a civilized discussion and discourse on these kinds of issues. And so with that, I would love any of your support. You can go to spencertoder.com. We're just sending out our first newsletters this week. We'll be telling about all the events we're putting on and anywhere that I'll be. You can follow me on Twitter or on Facebook or on Instagram, and you can donate at spencertoder.com, because it's going to take a boatload of money to do what we're trying to do, and we know that. And so any way you can help as volunteers. It sounds like a few of you, or at least are door knockers. That's good to know. And I appreciate any support that we will have down the road.
Spencer, I do have a question, but before that, I want to make sure that you know that there are people working so that in Missouri we do have fair maps. And the League of Women Voters is working with other groups to do that. So you might keep watch for that. And mainly where it's going right now is that we have to educate the judges, because it will probably go to the judges so that they know what a fair maps look like. My big concern is that the other side just totally lies about what we do. And so, how do you fight that? Because what they hear from Fox News and those other channels all day, it's it's completely not true. So they're going to say, "Oh, well, you're a socialist." So what do you say to that?
And so it kind of depends on who you're talking to. There are people who we're not going to convince in the near future. There are people who are so heels deep in, and we're just not going to convince everyone, and we don't have to. We have to pick up margin from where we were last time and cover the gap. And so we're heavily focused on voters who think that the insurrection was one of the largest catastrophes in American history. We are focused on people who are scared of fascism and understand that the Republican GOP, the administration, the elected representatives are supporting fascism. And it's incredibly important that we stay focused and that we focus on voting rights and that everyone deserves the right to vote. And so if we have a party that doesn't want people to vote, that is disqualifying. And if we have a party that doesn't think that it's a problem that people storm the Capitol to try to hang a vice president, that is disqualifying. And I think we spend a lot of time getting distracted because Republicans, I call them the greatest magicians that have ever existed, because in their left hand, they talk about things like critical race theory and 1619 Project, and they kind of storm the field with all of these different scattershot elements. And in their right hand, they're taking away voting rights. And we're so focused on what's happening in the left hand that we miss the right hand. And my goal is for us to stay as focused as possible on the people. If we just say, hey, don't vote for people like Trump, well, we're going to get slaughtered. I mean, we lost by 500,000 votes in the gubernatorial election last time through. And so it's not about that. It's about giving people something to vote for. And it's about giving them a bridge off of an island where they realize what is happening. And so every single day that more news comes out about Donald Trump and what he did and what he supported and the coup that he choreographed, every day gives us an opportunity to find people in the middle who traditionally considered themselves Reagan Republicans and who are maybe a little bit more open-minded socially, and giving them an option to say, hey, you might not be getting everything that you want out of our platform, but we're not fascists and we're not trying to hang the vice president. And it turns out there are a ton of those people. And so most of my conversations in that regard, having come from a business background, talk about economics. That if you want to talk about healthcare and economics, we spend 2.5 times what every other industrialized nation spends on healthcare for less than average healthcare. That's about $7,500 per employee at a company. If you want to incentivize a capitalist business person to want to get involved in a campaign like ours, the easiest way is to say, hey, if we expand, if we have Medicare for all, you're going to save $5,000 per employee. How many employees do you have? Is that money in your pocket? Are you going to hire more people? Will you have better efficiencies? Will you pay your people more? These are very concrete examples about how we increase quality of life, how we invest in things economically that help our society, and how we make sure we're creating a world where people want to live. I talked to a business person the other day who is one of the owners of the St. Louis Blues. And I said, who is going to drink beer at a Blues game when people don't live in Missouri? And if we promote policies where women can't get access to birth control, where we have more guns on the street that are unsecured than you could possibly imagine, people aren't going to come here. People aren't going to stay here. And so this is something that people need to get behind, and they need to get behind it fast. And we're going to be taking strong efforts to have those conversations. And I think that you'll find that there are two silos that speak very much in their own worlds. We spend a lot of time talking to other Democrats, and Republicans spend a lot of time talking to other Republicans. There's a huge center that has kind of voted Republican in the past, but isn't necessarily supportive of what's going on, and they're looking for a way out. And this is our chance to give them that path out, and we do it by getting out there and talking with them. I spend about 20% of my time talking to Republicans. In my opinion, the only way we're going to win this election is by running the general right now. And so while we're trying to win a primary and we're having conversations with Democrats regularly, in a state like Missouri, you can't spend a year talking to Democrats saying how you're slightly different than some of the other candidates, and then 3 months trying to convince everyone else to flip their vote. And so we spend a ton of time right now talking to people and making sure that we're positioned for the general election and that we can appeal to people, because there's nothing more important than stopping the fascism and winning this seat, in my opinion. And that's why I'm stepping back from an enjoyable life where I got to spend all the time in the world I wanted with my family to traveling back and forth across the state every day now, because we need this kind of change. We need people who are willing to step up, regardless of political background, who understand how to communicate with people, who listen to experts, and who make our voices heard.
Spencer,
Yes.
I see there's something in the chat that David Robinson put in. You might take a look at that. Good stump
Sure.
speech. It reminds me a lot of our president, Joe Biden. You're much younger than he is, however. If you become our senator, you might influence him. In which directions would you push? Anything different from his present course?
Thank you. No, that's a great question. And I appreciate the comparison. That's quite a comparison. I'll take it. I think that the number one thing right now is we have to blow up the filibuster. This is not a constitutional, a part of our constitution, and it is stopping all progress. And once we've gotten rid of the filibuster, which we can do and will do if we're able to flip Missouri. I mean, think about what happens if we flip Missouri. If we take a Republican seat and turn it into a Democrat seat, that's net 2. All of a sudden, Manchin and Sinema don't mean nearly as much. And if we can hold ground in other places and pick up a seat here or there, we can actually do this. And if we do this, we end up getting rid of the filibuster. We get Medicare for all. We get comprehensive gun safety. We get climate change infrastructure passed like you wouldn't believe. We make infant care free or affordable, because that is one of the drivers for abortion. And that's actually something that Republicans agree with me on. Most Republicans want to see an increase in sexual education, in access to contraception, and in infant care that's free or affordable. And those are ways that we can actually decrease abortion rates without having to get into a religious or ethical discussion about abortion. These are common sense ways to decrease abortion rates. And so if we get to a position where we have the presidency, we have true Democrats in the Senate who will vote as Democrats, and we have the House, watch out. I mean, this is the reform that we need in order to change things. We will pass John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We will pass HR 1. We will bring kind of the entire country back together, because I do think that as we continue to get divided, we make progress that much harder to make. So as far as Biden goes, I'm sure he has his reasons, and he is incredibly intelligent. But until we get rid of the filibuster, we're just not going to see progress. And I believe in progress and iteration. And so in science and in technology and in a lot of the worlds that I work in, you don't decide not to make progress or to try something. You try something, and if it doesn't work, you change it a little bit, and you change it a little bit, and you change it a little bit. How long have we been having the same conversations about the same policies my entire life? And we just haven't taken any action because we think it can't be changed down the road, or they realize that as soon as we give someone a $20 minimum wage, it's going to be really hard to take back. And so we need to make these changes. We need to address healthcare. We need to figure out how to deal with the racial wealth gap. One of the things that I look at constantly, and it terrifies me, is we gave $1,400 to people as an incentive and a stimulus, and then we made interest rates a percentage lower. And so anyone with a house refinanced their mortgage, and they just saved every month for the next 30 years. And white people own houses at a rate of 72%, and Black people own houses at a rate of 41%. So this disproportionately affected the racial wealth gap and will for the next 30 plus years. So someone with a $500,000 mortgage on their house is saving $480 a month. And over 30 years invested at a 6% return, that's almost $300,000 they're putting in their pocket that someone didn't have. And so their stimulus was 300 grand, while everyone else's was 1,400 once. And it's not acceptable. And we need to come up with economic solutions for this. And we need to level the playing field, because we are doing so many things that have long-term ramifications that are so detrimental. And I think looking at things holistically, taking a step back and saying, if this was an island of 10 people, how would we govern? And then let's scale that. Because if 2 people were sinking in quicksand, you wouldn't say, you know what, we don't need those people to help us connect collect coconuts anyway, and we don't really care about those people. You would get them out, and we don't do that as a country. We're letting so many people go unhoused and go without health care, and we're such a wealthy country that is so unnecessary. And we can't say that it's not possible because poorer countries do it. And these are expectations. So what it becomes is, what are our values? And I think the big discussion that isn't being had enough is, as a country, what do we value? And if we value healthcare, let's figure out how to get everyone healthcare. If we value education, let's figure out how to get everyone high quality education, free or affordably for those who can afford to pay something. But if we don't value those things, then let's move on. I believe that our values aren't aligned with a way where we spend 15% of our GDP on military and 2% on education. I don't think that's our values. But until we have an open conversation about what those values are, I don't see us getting anywhere productive. And I would like to have those conversations out in the public. I think those should be discussions. We need to figure out how to make people's lives better, and then we need to get out of their way. And that should be the role of the government.
Herb?
Thank you, and thank you for responding to David's point on chat, as well as your initial presentation. I think that anyone who runs for high office, and the Senate seat as well as the governorship is a high office, before they have campaigned for smaller venues or narrow venues, has a special challenge, which is how to induce within the public in general, especially for primary voters, but the general public too, one's definition of self that you would like them to hold before others define you in their mind generally. So special tactics are required, unless there's a special exception, and very few people have it, that they have achieved enormous renown in some other field. So everybody has something about them. They knew they were first to cross the Atlantic in an airplane alone. I don't think you've done that. And so what are you going to do special early on here? And it's tactical more than just a question about positions. Have you got some ideas of what you can do to get over this hurdle?
Boy, that's a great question. So my belief, if you look at our state and you look at how we end up winning in it, and if you look at how we end up resonating, there are specific demographics that we can appeal to where we know that people don't tend to show up, where we know that young people leave the state and don't register to vote here, where we know that there are people who are unregistered that we can find. I want to spend time getting to know those people, finding out why and communicating with them. I think it's very hard to say, oh, I'm this celebrity form and this is how you should view me. I don't think that that's normal or appropriate. And I think we tend to gamify and act like politics or sports and politicians are athletes. And I think that's scary and dangerous to me. We end up putting people on pedestals and not treating them just like normal people. And I think that my goal is to pick up trash with people on the streets, to host blood drives, to go and be present and show people that this is not normal politics. This is your neighbor who happens to think similarly to you and has a plan to win, caring about you and making your voice heard. And so I don't know that I even want to specifically go out and brand myself with a label or say, this is my calling card. I think it's really about having real and genuine conversations with people and listening to them. And that's really my goal. I don't know that fully answers your question, but I don't think that it's appropriate or normal to only vote for people who have either significant political experience or who have achieved something amazing. I think that what we need in politicians are people who listen and who care and who are empathetic and who listen to experts and make good decisions. And when I look at politicians who have been politicians for years, I find that most of them are terrible. And so I don't know that being a politician qualifies you for being a politician. I really think that working hand in hand with Republicans who are carpenters and scientists who are Democrats and achieving goals on a daily basis and solving hard problems and listening to experts is more qualifying. And so I don't know the exact answer to your question, but I do appreciate it, and I'll give it more thought. I'm not positive that I am a figure like that, to be honest. I don't have that type of pedigree. I've just always worked really hard and listened to people and done everything I could to be successful. Alvin?
Yes, Spencer, I commend your passion. Don't lose it, regardless of what the outcome. But looking at the reality of this adventure that you're going on, once elected, what would be your top priorities?
So number one has to be getting rid of the filibuster. Nothing happens without getting rid of the filibuster in our country currently. I think climate change has to be addressed, and we need Medicare for all. I think those have to be the biggest priorities. We then have to figure out how we deal with the student debt crisis, which is trillions of dollars that's suffocating our young people and making it impossible for them to invest in futures. And something that isn't talked about nearly enough is the fact that young people aren't having children at the same rate that they used to. And for our society to continue to be successful, we need to procreate. And so looking at the root causes for that, why aren't we having children at the same rate? Well, it's really expensive. I have a 1.5-year-old, almost 2-year-old son, and daycare is prohibitively expensive. Healthcare is prohibitively expensive. Stress is through the roof. It is virtually impossible for a couple who want to have a child for both of them to not be working at the same time. And so then you figure out, if you offset that by healthcare costs and daycare costs, how do you afford to do that on a modern salary? And so I think talking about all of the things that are addressed there is essential. I also, and this is kind of an aside, I think we do a terrible job as a party, not everyone, but many people in this party, and not just in this party, but in the Republican Party at the same time, do a terrible job at growing our bench. And so one of my goals is to take the information we're learning, take the experience I'm having, and pass it on to as many people as possible so we can build that bench. We need to be competitive in every county in this state. That helps down ballot and up ballot. I don't want to be in DC my entire life. I want to solve problems and train other people to have the kind of experience and mindset that I believe that I will take to DC. And then I want to come back home. I want to be here with my family. I want to coach my kids' baseball team. These are things that are important to me. And so it's essential in my mind that we build the bench. And so every single night I take notes on what I learned that day. And this is going to be passed on to other candidates down the road. And the data that we're using on our campaign, we own that data. And so again, in the future, we'll be passing that data on as appropriate and as ethically responsible to do, to make sure that other people don't make the same mistakes that we make and can communicate with people in more effective ways. And so I think in my mind, those are the most important things at the moment. I think it's essential that we codify Roe v. Wade. I mean, if we end up in a position where we have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, we need to put a law in immediately that keeps abortion fully legal forever. And that is something that I don't think we can hesitate on as we see the persecution that the Republican Party is putting on a woman's right to choose. So that's and I, honestly, and I think I led with this, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and HR 1. If we don't pass voting rights and get this suppression taken care of, I don't see there being a future for our democracy, because when 40% of people in Kansas City don't vote, that's not a democracy, because those people want healthcare and education and good paying jobs too. They're just suppressed or don't think that the government's going to do what they want anyway, and so they don't show up. And so we need to find ways to deal with that and to motivate people to get out. and to deal with the gerrymandering and voter suppression. Alice or Mary Jo, either way, I don't know who's leading the way.
Go ahead, Alice.
Just a couple of things, Spencer, and I'm really excited about your candidacy. I also know Elizabeth well, excited she's going to be working with you. That's very exciting. Couple of things. Medicare for all. I have 30 years in public health, but when we use that slang term Medicare for all, people think this is free insurance. Heck, I'm paying $400 a month for Medicare, and I never paid that as a poorly paid state worker for health insurance. So I think it's important to clarify that is not something instant, and it is not free. It just means we would have access to everyone, you know. So I think it's really, really important to clarify that, because when Bernie talked about it, it drove me crazy, you know. So please take the time to do that when you mention that. Secondly, you mentioned the cost of childcare. I know it well. I have an 8-year-old granddaughter. And also the millennials and that generation, the student loan crisis is real. It is very real. And I don't know if you mentioned that. And there was one more thing, but I'll end with that. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. So I did mention the student loan crisis. It is terrifying. And it creates such a disproportionate allocation of resources and wealth. If you think about who can afford to pay for school, it's really just passed down wealth from your parents, and it's generational, and it keeps systemic issues in place. We will be coming out with this YouTube series, and the first one is focused on healthcare. So I highly recommend it. We've got Ed Weisbart, who's the head of Universal Healthcare for All for Missouri, for physicians for Universal Healthcare for Missouri, as on the panel. We have the leader of Athena Health, and we have a technologist in town who runs a tech startup that is also dealing in the health sector, and that will be interviewed as part of that series. And I think you'll enjoy and appreciate that as well. Mary Jo?
Yes, you haven't mentioned immigration and your stand on immigration. And I think that's a pretty important area. Certainly as important as things like student loans.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's phenomenal. I appreciate you bringing that up. So living in St. Louis would be in a significantly worse place if it wasn't for the Bosnian immigration that took place earlier on in my childhood. We had an amazing influx of immigrants come here that made our community more vibrant, more culturally sound, more economically productive. I think that not only do we need a path to citizenship for dreamers, I think we should make dreamers citizens immediately, and we should greatly increase and enhance the number of immigrants that we bring into our country. When you talk about the fact that we don't have the same population growth, one easy way to deal with population growth issues is to let a larger population in. And particularly as we have these thousands of translators in Afghanistan who are coming back to the US, bring them home. Let's get them into Missouri. Let's get them into our country. Let's embrace them and thank them for the values that they supported and their help. I think that land is a very strange thing in its ownership, and we should all feel very privileged that we live in this country and that there is so much land here for us all to share, and there is plenty to go around for people with the values necessary to help our country thrive. So I did not mention that, and I do appreciate you bringing that up, because I would be remiss to leave that out. Herb.
I want to thank you for coming this day, but you also came to the Democratic picnic, if I remember rightly, and I think we chatted at that point. I hope that it will absolutely wear you out in all ways, trying to make it around regularly to every county in Missouri. But I hope that you are doing some of this at this point, because you're going to need people in every county out there trying to enlarge the turnout. And how's that part of the campaign going? I know you've invested in that. I think you told me at that time, it's one of the things you're trying to do.
Yeah, it's going really well. one of the things we've been able to do, both by driving around the state and through online outreach, is we have over 20 volunteers signed up who plan to knock doors for us, who plan to help, who plan to letter write, who plan to make calls, and they're from all over the state. And so, to your point, this has to be grassroots. You don't get people to vote for you by text messaging them. You just don't. I volunteered 200 hours on Nicole Galloway's campaign, making phone calls and sending text messages and doing everything else. And I don't feel like I flipped a single vote. I felt like I was wasting time in the end, like I wasn't able to communicate effectively. What we have found, what we know, is that people listen to their friends and family. And if you're going to actually get people to change their direction, it's not going to be from someone text messaging you. It's going to be from someone you care about, sharing their experience, explaining why they trust someone or believe in someone, and having real deep conversations. And so we believe heavily in deep canvassing. We want to knock a lot of doors, and we want to be everywhere. And we are going to use all of our energy to do that, and then to supplement it with a strong digital strategy to make sure that if we can't be door to door in a community, that we're also making sure that those conversations are being had publicly. But again, it is about being open and being accessible. And so I'm not joking. If you click on the little floating head on my website, it begins a conversation with me, and I always respond. And that's how I think politicians should handle things. I think that when we go out and we vote for a policy, we should say, here are the 10 research papers that supported my decision. And even if you don't agree with me, you can see why I had this point. And we don't do that enough. You have to do that in high school. You have to show your bibliography or your works cited page, and then you become a politician, and all of a sudden you don't have to show the list of lobbyists who wrote the bill for you, and it's silly. And it's time to get to a place where that isn't the case. And so we are going around the state, and again, it is about doing things that are fun too, like throwing these parties with 3 or 4 bands, and we're going to be doing some stuff with spoken word and slam poetry, and really just highlighting the work of the people doing the work in the community already. Because one of the things that we found, there are a tremendous number of people in this state doing phenomenal work. We're just poorly coordinated. And when you start putting people together, we can accomplish quite a few things that we couldn't accomplish apart.
That also partly answers my previous question.
Caleb?
Yes, thank you for coming this afternoon. So we just went through a last year of racial reckoning with the murder of George Floyd. And in the Democrat primary for Senate, we have 5 candidates. If someone was looking for diversity, I think one would reasonably argue that your competition, Jewel Kelly, or I'm forgetting his name right now, Richardson from Kansas City, might offer more in that regard. And our front runners are more, frankly, men like yourself and I. As a candidate, how do you plan to differentiate yourself from Scott Sifton and Lucas Kuntz in that regard? And what do you say to the voters of Missouri that are looking to prioritize diversity and leadership now?
Great question. I think the gentleman that you're speaking of was Tim Shepard, not Richardson. Is that correct?
Yeah, my mistake. Thank you for that.
No problem. I just want to be respectful to him. So we spend time on the campaign trail, seeing each other, getting to know each other. And I have nothing bad to say about any of the other candidates. And from a diversity perspective, we need to talk about diversity of experience and what we bring to office when we go to office. And so for me, the experience that I'm bringing is working hand in hand with people from a variety of different backgrounds, from significant problem solving and from listening to experts and using innovation to create instrumental change in technology, in life sciences, in the healthcare space, and in everything that I've tried to do. When you look at some of the other candidates' pedigrees, you end up looking at things and saying, what about a lawyer makes them qualified to be a politician more so than someone who communicates with people on a daily basis from all backgrounds? and what qualifies someone for a specific role. And again, I'm not gay, I'm not Black, but I'm empathetic and I'm understanding and I'm open-minded, and I'm not trying to say that I have the lived experience of someone from those communities, but I certainly am empathetic and caring about people in those communities and want to make sure that their rights are preserved. And I think right now we need to focus, and again, not saying that any of those things would be disqualifying. I think we need to focus on winning, and we need to make sure that the candidate that we have has a strategy to get to the finish line. There's nothing more important than defeating fascism and making sure that we take this seat. And as we go forward, I hope to get the support of those other candidates as I hopefully win the primary. And I think is a lot of our strategy and a lot of our campaigning, I think you'll find along the way, is very much about looking forward and bringing people together and not isolating or othering people or going after other candidates. That's not our game plan. Our game plan is to be positive and give people something to vote, giving people someone and something to vote for. And I think that's differentiating. And so, I've lived here my entire life. To some of the candidates, that is differentiating as well. And my background, again, is really in listening to people and answering questions and solving problems. And I think we need to get back to understanding that this isn't about, like I was saying earlier, it's not about having like a sports team with an athlete who's, the Albert Pujols. This is about having the Yadier Molina who's leading on the field and listens and studies everything and makes sure that we're making the right choices. And that's kind of where I feel like I fit in. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have a plan to win. I wouldn't be putting my family through this. My wife is an introvert. This is not her cup of tea. And she's also very analytical, and she wouldn't let me do this if she didn't think we had a plan to win. And so that to me was the original barrier to entry. And I think that my experiences will put me in a very good position to be competitive and to be understanding to people who, both in our progressive base as well as center right Republicans who we need to win over and who I've spent my entire career working with in the real estate field. Yes, David.
I'm going to press you on your experience. I was fascinated by the way you talked about real estate and race and economic inequality. From your experience, you understand on the ground level, in a place like St. Louis, which is a good example, exactly what's been going on, let's say, since World War II or even earlier. But how are you going to talk about this in a progressive way without hearing people like Donald Trump saying that you and the Democrats are going to destroy the suburbs and take away what I have? That's the voter who is fearful of any talk about progress in those areas. I happen to agree with you. I think this is the most critical area. And if you could do it right, it could really distinguish you with people. But how do you convince them that moving in a correct, in a moral direction here might undo some of the tragic racism and inequality that is making America, frankly, go down the tubes?
So I've lived this experience. So in my real estate background, not only did I do commercial leasing and investment sales, I have my own broker's license. So I sell houses, I lease houses, I rehab 3 to 5 houses a year. I've watched houses get appraisals that had Black people in them, and then the same house a week later have appraisals that had white people in them, the same house, and I watched them appraised differently. I've seen this inherent racism. And I think, to your point, and to a point I started making earlier, there are going to be people who we are never going to appeal to. There are going to be people who, if you don't understand that someone else is hurting and that someone else is disenfranchised, and you don't care that someone doesn't have healthcare or someone's living on the streets, we're never going to see eye to eye. That person does not have the empathy to ever understand the things that we care about, and will never vote for me. The people that we're focusing on are the people who we can say, there's an economic benefit to not paying for these issues. And so I use data and I use science and I use facts and analytics. And so when I talk about the GI Bill, the original GI Bill, a lot of people don't realize this, but Black people were not allowed to get the GI Bill because redlining exists in a way that the areas where the GI Bill was prevalent, they couldn't get loans, even though it was 100% down by the GI Bill. And so we have these inherent structural issues. And when I tell someone that, and they say, "Oh, there's no way that's true," and I'll send them the article, and it's showing it with data and with facts and with history and having these conversations, and then appealing to their pocketbook. It's saying to a business person, if we don't have a middle class, does your business succeed? If people can't afford food, does your grocery store have people, buying food? I mean, during COVID, the two most stolen things were baby diapers and baby formula. That's heartbreaking. Do you want to live in a society like that? And so we do it appealing to the emotive element, and then we do it appealing to the pocketbook, because sometimes that's what it takes. And one of the things that I have found in this race is that people look at politics and they look at supporting candidates as a donation, and that is not healthy. Donating to candidates is an investment. And the same way that my friends will move into a better school district so their kids can go to a better school, they need to be investing in campaigns with their dollars to show that they support candidates that are going to make people's lives better. And that to me has been an interesting challenge in how we think about things. And we really need to get back to that, to a mindset of, if we want to have a society that is equitable, we need to invest in that society and the people who are going to bring us that society. And it's very disheartening when I talk to people who spend $1 million on a house for a good school for their kid, or $28,000 for preschool for my friend's daughter. And I say, I'd like you to donate to my campaign. And they write me a $50 check. And I'm like, okay, that's awesome. Yeah, perfect. That you get it. It's mind blowing. We can't do that anymore. The stakes are too high. This isn't even about whether you like one policy or another anymore. This is about whether you support a party that supports fascism or you don't. And we need to make it that crystal clear for people, because that's where we are. And so we can nitpick and we can split hairs about different elements of different policies. But in the end, if we don't win, like literally, if we don't win, we put ourselves on the edge of losing a figment of democracy. And that is unacceptable. And it can't happen. We can't do that. And that is, that's my driving force in this. This is why I'm bringing on the smartest people I can and the hardest working people I can to work on this campaign, because we look at this as me being kind of a vessel for this type of success going forward. I didn't want to be a politician. I want to help people. And so we're putting together a team that can help people. And we're going to do that at every step of the way. Yes, David.
You mentioned fascism several times. Most of the people in this group, I think, are more better educated than I am. I don't know what fascism is, and I got a feeling the average voter in Missouri doesn't. If you just come in and say, "Oh yeah, we got to fight fascism," I don't. What does that mean? What is fascism? Could you put it in layman's terms as part of your, now for me, and as part of your campaign?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what you say is so important, because in this conversation, I speak to the people who I'm speaking with, and so I somewhat assume that most people in this group, if you're talking to a primary candidate 17 months before an election, you're probably political wonks to some extent. But when I go and talk to people about every issue, I change the way we have the discussion. If you look at my website, we don't talk about being pro-life or pro-choice. We say, I don't like the idea of a woman needing to have an abortion, but the government should have no place in that discussion. And if we want to make abortion less prevalent, then we need access to sexual education, contraception, and free or affordable infant care. Because why would we why would we let another party own pro-life? You don't want to be the thing that isn't pro-life. And so same thing with guns. We don't talk about gun control because we listen to mom's demand and their data, and we know that we talk about gun safety. And so when we're knocking doors, we'll be handing out trigger locks to people who say that gun safety is a big issue for them, because I don't care if you have 50 guns. I just don't want your son to find them on accident and hurt himself. And so we do that with every issue. So from fascism, I look at fascism as we don't have control of our government, and our votes don't mean anything, and we are having things imposed on us. And I think that we are very much approaching and broaching that world. Yes, Herb.
There's an old saw about Missouri politics and some adjoining states that there are 3 litmus test issues for anyone who tries to run under the Democratic banner: abortion, race, and guns. You may be able to win a statewide office if you can't fail the litmus test on one. You're really lucky too. But it's hard to find someone who's won statewide office in Missouri in the last many decades who has crossed the line on all 3. Now you're attempting to do this by finesse and definition. How's that going?
It's going really well. I have found that 5% of the people I speak to are still interested in talking, but don't think that a Democrat can win the state. 95% of the people I talk to say that if a Democrat can win the state, this is the only way a Democrat can win the state. And they get very supportive. And so the first quarter of this campaign, which ended just a few days ago, the goal of the entire quarter was to do outreach constantly, to be picking up trash. I picked up trash in East St. Louis with city activists, even though we were in Illinois. And they said, what's a Missouri politician doing in East St. Louis? And I said, this is where you are. And so the first quarter was all about being with the base and making sure that people knew that I'm willing to do the hard work and be out there, and that I am a normal person who just cares about them. We did not try to raise money. We raised money from friends and family primarily, and we raised around $40,000 in the first quarter. This next quarter, we're going to start advertising. We're going to start doing outreach. I'm going to start calling people and asking for money and really ramping up. And I think you'll find that there will be significantly more financial support this next quarter. But from aligning the people who are the influencers of our state, the people who people listen to, the people who people respect, this message is resonating with them heavily. And that was our goal. We need to not only resonate with the progressive base and to resonate with moderate Democrats, we also need to resonate with center-right Republicans. And again, 20% of my time is spent with center-right Republicans having that conversation. And so when I sit down and I say, if we're going to win this state, we have to essentially change the voting field by 500,000-ish votes compared to the last election if everyone shows up. That's challenging. But if I say, okay, the Republicans keep moving further and further right, and we have this opportunity in the center to have real conversations with people who don't necessarily feel like they have a home right now. We can be that home, and they don't differentiate themselves from us they don't differentiate from us that much. They want better healthcare, they want better education, they want better paying jobs. We tend to not have conversations with them and to get to know them and to have and to listen to them and to have those conversations. And so that's what we're doing. And we'll be doing it for the next 17 months until we win the state. Well, I don't see any more hands, and I do appreciate everyone's time. I want to be respectful. It's 1:10. I'm happy to take more questions. I'm happy to stay on. Again, you can always get to me through my website or literally any way that you can find. I'll respond to a Facebook message. I respond to Twitter DMs. I respond, my goal is to be as accessible as humanly possible. I'm going to be in Columbia quite often. I know most of you are located in Columbia or in the surrounding area. Happy to sit down and have a coffee or a beer or a soda or whatever you determine is the appropriate beverage of choice. Bourbon tends to be my go-to, but happy to get together with anyone and everyone. I love the energy and the enthusiasm of groups like yours and what y'all are doing. And I can't tell you how much easier it makes my job going around the state to know that there are folks like you who can be the voice of advocacy when we're all on board with the same message. And I think that if we all unite under a message like this, and I'm working with down ballot candidates on similar messaging, if we all unite under this kind of a message, I think that this wins Missouri. I really do. And I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think so. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Spencer.